So College Football 26 officially announced. I'm sure you're just as excited as I am, but what if I told you that there are 11 key stats that I think if they add would totally change the game? Now, obviously not every idea is equal. Some ideas take a heck of a lot more effort to implement than others, and also some ideas are just more helpful to you than some of the other ones. So to help break down the 11 ideas that I have and argue that they are worth doing and show you today, I've made this chart. Now that horizontal axis is how much effort I think each individual stat would take to add to the game. But on the vertical axis, we have how much value I think this stat will have to you, me, and everybody else that plays College Football 26. So anything on the top left is both low effort, I think, and also something that I think is valuable. So let's start with those green dots. Consider those like quick wins. First things first, when we look at team stats, I think that we should have a little bit more detail than what we see here. Like, it's kind of crazy to me that we could only see passing yards, rushing yards, and a couple other basics. Now, I'm not asking anybody to make anything new, but what I am asking is for us to roll up some of these individual player stats to the team level. So here's what I mean. When we look at individual players, we can see a lot of extra details. For example, if you're like Mike Raj and all you do is catch 60-yard deep balls, you can see his typical yards after catch isn't necessarily as high as some others. So what if we just roll that up to the team level? I feel like it would be super sick to see what percent of a team's passing yards is coming from yards after the catch. Especially in online leagues, you can really easily see which one of your friends is doing nothing but screens and checkdowns and which one of your friends is really relying on the deep ball. Again, I don't think that's a high effort thing as someone that does work with data, because you have the player level stats. All you have to do is change the level of detail that you're looking at. So rather than summing up all the different plays for each player, you sum up all the different plays for each team. And speaking of yards after catch, what if we also had some percentages in here? That's idea number 2. I think it would be great if we could scale some of these to percentages so we don't have to mentally do it in our head all the time. Like, sure, on this screenshot, we can see that Clemson is a pretty good running team compared to the rest of the teams listed, but is that also because they're just a better offense? Like, look at the total offensive yards. I mean, they're also dominant in terms of the pass if you look at these teams next to them. So what if instead we also had right next to it, like, what percent of your total offensive yards come from throwing the ball or come from running the ball? That'd be a very quick way to see which one of your friends are really run heavy versus really pass heavy. I'm just now realizing that we actually don't have 11 ideas, we have 10, because 2 of them were what I just said. So we're already through 2 out of the 10, but the last green dot right there is personally, I think, the single most important one, like almost in the entire video, because that one has a lot less effort than some of those red dots, but also I think would be so impactful for you in your dynasty. And that is having the ability to adjust things based off the denominator. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, to go back to my favorite guy, Mike Raj, he has just as many receptions as the next leading receiver. But what if I told you that that other receiver is not on the field nearly as much because he's also a returner, so he's pretty tired? Well, now all of a sudden, those 31 receptions look a little bit different when you know that one guy had 40 extra snaps compared to the other guy. The same thing can be said for team level stats. If you are playing a dynasty with 5-minute quarters and every single sim is 15-minute quarters and you get 25 offensive plays a game and everybody else gets 60, there's gotta be a way to account for that, especially in football too, where backups can play a lot. And something like yards per carry is a great way of scaling that for backups, right? Like, your starter might have 75 rushing yards and your backup might have 50 rushing yards. But if your backup did that on 3 carries and it took your starter 25 carries, like, you might change how you look at those 2 guys. So I think there needs to be a quick and easy way to adjust for downs played, both at the individual stat level and the team stat level. I don't really care how many offensive yards I have if it's week 4 and I've played 1 game and everybody else has played 3. Let me see how many yards per carry I have, or let me see how many yards per attempt I have throwing the ball. And I know that those exist at the individual level, but let's see them at the team level. So yeah, whether it's scaling based on how many games were played or at the individual level scaling based on how many downs were played, it's very difficult to evaluate 2 different players on the same team if one of them's on the field for 3 times as much as the other guy. But all right, it's time to shift to the wish list of 4 ideas that I think are gonna take a little bit of effort, and they might not be as impactful as these first ones, but I think these are worthwhile. First up, offensive linemen. I am a little bit frustrated that we still only have this basic level of detail when it comes to seeing what stats our offensive linemen are producing. Now, I'm not saying we need to recreate ESPN's proprietary pass block win rate for every single player in a video game, but wouldn't it be nice to see how many sacks you give up as a percentage of how many times they were on the field for a pass? Like, we could see the downs played. We know whether a down is a run or a pass. So let me see for every 20 pass plays, how many sacks on average each one of my guys gives up. Because if the backup gives up 2 sacks and they're only on there for 7 pass plays, but my starter gives up 2 sacks and they're on there for 700 pass plays, those are not the same. I also know that this can be done, I think, because didn't we used to be able to see like pancakes in a bit more detail, either in previous Maddens or previous college football games? I just think right now, if someone told me, how can you use the stats available to evaluate your offensive linemen? I genuinely do not think there's a single way to do it. Just dividing sacks by downs played right now, really, it's not doing much for me, and it's probably not doing much for you. I would love to just see more detail with our offensive line stats. Okay, here's another small thing. Again, probably not that important to most, but it's important to me. I know that in college, when a quarterback takes a 7-yard sack, it counts as -7 rushing yards. And that's fine. That's how the game works. But I just wish we could actually see that number. I wish there was a way to separate the rushing yards for a quarterback from carries versus the rushing yards lost on sacks. Again, there's still rushing yards. There should still be a rushing yards column, but can we just know like sack yards? You know, maybe that's in the quarterback passing stats, because I think we have a column that says how many sacks you took. You know individual play level details. What if you just added those numbers together? If you took 2 sacks and you lost 8 yards on each, you know you had -16 sack yards, and maybe, just maybe, do me a favor and make it easy for us to subtract those 2 numbers so I can see that my quarterbacks are actually better scramblers than I thought. Or maybe I'm just taking too many sacks and I'm noticing this more than others. Another tiny tweak, I'm sure you've seen this if you've watched college or pro football lately, but having the little average yards to go on third downs is such a cool little thing to me. If you're 0 for 7 on third downs, but your average yards to go on third down is 18 because you took so many sacks that you asked the request that I just did, well, like, that makes sense if you're not converting on third downs. So I don't know, maybe it's like, hey, here's your typical yards to go on third down for the season, like 5.7. And then when it says that you're 0 for 6 on third downs today, we could say that that's because the average distance was like 20. Again, small tweak, don't know if it's worth the effort, but I feel like that's a nice thing that the pros have started to use and the college game in real life. So I feel like, you know, if a video game is supposed to be at least somewhat related to real life as far as like the football side, I hope like maybe the broadcasting side can mirror that as well. Here's another small, very vague thing, but having ranks and things, I feel like would be so cool. Like maybe for the coaches, if we just see what their typical rank as far as offensive yards per game, or maybe their typical rank as far as defensive yards per game, I feel like that would be so nice to have. Not only do you have their record, but you can see that, dang, my friend always has the best offense in the nation. We need to know about that. But all right, 3 ideas left. We have made it to the moonshots. These things are bright red for a reason. I think these are both very, very difficult to do, but also potentially very helpful to both you and me. For starters, when we're recruiting, all we have right now is height and weight. And I, didn't get the chance to check in NCAA 14 if there was any correlation between the 40-yard dash time and actual speed, or the bench press and actual strength, but it was kind of nice to have. Like you got 1 extra spot on your roster, you want a receiver, you don't have enough hours to scout people, so let's just grab that one guy in high school that ran a 4.27 and is a 2-star JUCO guy. Does not need to be a perfect predictor. I do not want to just sort by fastest 40-yard dash and have that always relate to the actual scouting, but I think it would be very helpful if there was something a bit more detailed about these players beyond having to scout them. Again, maybe it's just storylines. I know the NBA only has 5 positions to deal with, so they are allowed to go a lot more in depth with their different player archetype descriptions, but there's gotta be more than like 3 different types of defensive ends. I don't know. I mean, adding just 1 more archetype for each individual player would be like a lot of extras, but look at how detailed some of these descriptions are for players. Like, you do not need to know their overall at all to know what these things mean if you follow basketball. I feel like it could be very cool to have something for football. Like, imagine if a left guard wasn't just power, but is like a mauling run blocker. And it's like, okay, this guy is not just big, but he is beefy, and you want to run behind him, but you do not want to have him pull like a pulling guard on a kickout block. But okay, I'm realizing I just said 2 of the 3 big ideas, both more details for unscouted players, whether that's 40-yard dash times or bench press or something that we can see without having to scout guys. And again, still make it worth scouting, because I don't want to like remove the need to scout, but like feel like there should be something between nothing and scouting. And I don't know what that is. And then the second idea that I accidentally said, blending it into one again, was the player types. I think we could really do something cool with player types, because admittedly, again, I don't want to compare everything to 2K, but their player descriptions are so cool. Finally, I'm gonna end with a comparison to 2K, even though I just said I wouldn't, and that is their analytics tool. I mentioned it in a past video. I think this thing has been around for almost a decade now, and I just think it's so sick. You could choose the entire league, specific teams, just your roster, and you could plot 2 different stats across these 2 axes, just like my chart here, and you could scale them too based off either per game, per season, per 36 minutes, just like, you know, per down played that we were talking about earlier. And you could find some really interesting things. Like in basketball, you might be able to see who is playing the most and taking the most shots versus who has the highest percentage of turnovers. And that might help identify individuals that really should have the ball in their hands a little less. Again, I mean, even basic things could be so insightful. Like imagine the y-axis was number of targets a receiver was getting per game. The x-axis was how many downs played they're doing on average per game. And, you know, we would expect to see a general trend, right? Like if you're playing more, you're gonna get more targets. But imagine if you saw somebody way up on the top left, and it's like, this dude is playing 12 snaps per game and he's getting 7 targets per game. What does that tell you? Like it tells you either 1, you are force feeding this guy and maybe you shouldn't, again, back to my garage, or 2, maybe you need to force feed this guy because every time the dude's on the field, he's open enough for you to target him. But that little 30-second description I just had is not possible in this game right now at scale. Like I could do it if I manually write down every single stat, but we're already trying to do videos like this. So admittedly, I don't have the time to do that. So that is my final ask. It is all the way in the top right corner, highest potential impact for sure, in my opinion. Also, the hardest. I'm literally asking for an entirely new feature that I'm sure they have no plans of making, but man, if we had an analytics tool, dude, that would be so cool. So let's finish on that, all right? Those are my 10 or 11 ideas, depending on how you group them. Would love to hear your thoughts on these, and if you have any other stats-driven ideas. Again, I just want to keep throwing stuff out there for the College Football 26 team. I hope that these are helpful. I hope that they're of interest to you, and maybe, just maybe, in a couple months, we'll see some of them. Probably not, but maybe. Now, YouTube does like to throw a video of mine on the screen that it thinks you're gonna like. Thanks for watching this one. If you wanna check out one that YouTube thinks you'll like, I don't know. I actually don't know which side of the screen I'm gonna put it on, but YouTube is gonna say so. I don't know.